Hi and welcome to a new process where we are going to identify and analyze the product risks. It's part of the analysis knowledge area and the executing process group, and it can be defined as the process of uncovering and examining assumptions and uncertainties that could positively or negatively affect success in the definition, development, and the expected results of the proposed solution. So as per the PM book, the risk is defined as an uncertain event that, if it happens, might affect the project positively if it was an opportunity or negatively if it was a threat. Now, the key benefits of the identify and analyze product risks process are that it supports proactive management. You are being proactive when dealing with risks of uncertainties in business analysis activities, and it uncovers and proactively addresses area of potential strengths and weaknesses in the product. So dealing with risk management in general, either in project management or business analysis, is about being proactive in dealing with risks. You should not wait for the risk to happen and then work around a way to deal with this risk. You should be proactive, identify the risks earlier, analyze them, and plan for their appropriate responses. It's part of the executing process group, and the ITTOs can shown in front of you. We have 5 inputs to this process, 11 tools and techniques, and 1 output, which will be the product risk analysis. The data flow diagram of this process shows 5 inputs coming from the enterprise or the organization itself, the enterprise environmental factors, the business goals and objectives coming from the determine future state process, the product scope, which comes from the assemble business case process, the analysis approach from the determine analysis approach, and the requirements and product information coming from the define and elaborate the product requirements. And the key output will be the product risk analysis that will be used as an input for 3 processes: conduct business analysis, planning, prepare for transition to future state, and obtain solution acceptance for release. Here we are going to use the product risk analysis as an input. Business analysis supports the portfolio, program, or project risk management processes through the identification and analysis of risks that impact business analysis activities and or the product, otherwise known as product risks. So in this process, and from the business analysis perspective, we will be concerned or focusing only on the product or the solution risk, while the project manager will be concerned with the project risks. Product risks can be defined as uncertainties that can affect success in definition, development, and expected results of the product or solution. Product risks that have an adverse impact can lead to failures in the product if they are not addressed well. So risk management is something essential in business analysis and in project management. We should identify all the possible project or product risks, and we need to address them before they occur. Identifying and analyzing product risks includes the following activities. We usually start with identifying the product risks, determining the risks and documenting their characteristics like the probability and the impact, which may affect business analysis activities and or the product. Once you have a list of the identified risks, you can start performing the qualitative risk analysis process, or it's sometimes called the perform subjective risk analysis, prioritizing product risks for further analysis or action by assessing and considering their probability of occurrence and impact. So in this step, we will analyze the identified product risks in a subjective manner, while in this step, performing quantitative risk analysis, we will assess and analyze the product risks in an objective manner, numerically analyzing the effect of identified product risks on the business objectives of the proposed solution. Then, once you identified and analyzed the product risks, it's the time to plan for proper responses, developing options and actions to address the product risks. Product risk responses may include modifying or identifying additional product requirements and or additional project activities in order to take advantage of opportunities or addressing the potential failure points of the threats. An opportunity is an uncertain event with a positive impact. A threat is an uncertain event with a negative impact. Product risk management thus leads to identifying and proactively resolving the gaps in the requirements and other product information. And while you are planning the risk responses, there are some strategies that you can use for negative risks or threats. These strategies include, first of all, the avoid strategy. Avoid means eliminating the threat by eliminating the root cause or the probability of this risk, taking an action to avoid it totally. While transfer is about shifting the impact of the threat to a third party. An example of that transfer will be insuring your car, for example. By developing an insurance for your car, you are shifting the risk of having an accident to the insurance company. This is exactly the transfer strategy. You are shifting the impact of this threat to a third party, usually by a compensation of the money. Mitigate means reducing the probability and or the impact of the threat. So avoid is about eliminating the threat, while mitigation is about only reducing the probability of this risk happening or reducing the impact if this risk occur. Accept, acknowledging the threat, but do not take any action unless the risk occurs. And we usually accept the risk as is only for the risks with low impact or low probability. Now, the strategies you can use for dealing with opportunities or positive risks includes, first of all, exploit, making whatever it's needed in order to ensure that we will realize this opportunity. So, exploit is something similar to the avoid and dealing with threats. Enhance, it's similar to the mitigation. If you are enhancing an opportunity, you are increasing the probability and or positive impacts of this opportunity. Sharing means allocating some or all of the ownership of the opportunity to a third party, like making a partnership or a joint venture with another firm in order to gain an opportunity. And acceptance is taking advantage of the opportunity if it arises, but do not actively pursue it. Now, when you are done with planning the risk responses, it's the time to implement the risk responses by monitoring the risk triggers and ensuring that the planned response is being implemented once the risk occur. Monitoring risks, monitoring the implementation of the agreed upon risk responses, tracking identified product risks, monitoring residual product risks, identifying new product risks, and evaluating the risk process effectiveness through activities like the risk reassessment, the risk review, or the risk audit. When identifying and analyzing product risks, consideration should be provided to any applicable assumptions, constraints, dependencies, or issues. Usually the assumptions, the constraints, the dependencies, or the issues can lead to risks, especially the threats on the project. Assumptions can be defined as factors that are considered true, real, or certain without actual proof or demonstration. There is an element of risk with every assumption that is made on the project. The risk is associated with the event or condition that would occur if the factor turns out not to be true, real, or certain. If you are planning for your project and you did some assumptions and these assumptions were not true for any reason, most probably you will have a risk of this not valid or invalid assumption. Constraints, limiting factors that affect the execution of a portfolio, program, project, or process, and maybe business or technical factors. In business analysis, constraints are limiting factors that affect the development or implementation of the solution, and risks can be identified for situations if limits are reached. If you are reaching a specific constraint on the project, then a risk might be identified. Dependencies, logical relationships that exist between two or more entities. Risks can be identified for situations if dependencies are not met. And finally, the issues, points or matters in question, in dispute or not settled and under discussion. If a risk event occurs and the response plan is inadequate, the risk may be converted into an issue. Conversely, new risks may be introduced for unresolved issues. So there is a strong connection between risks and issues in business analysis and in project management. Converting assumptions, constraints, dependencies, or unresolved issues into risk allows product teams to be more proactive in the management of these items, as risks tend to be analyzed in more frequent intervals. Now, what are the inputs we will need to have before we kick off the identify and analyze product risks process? We have 5 inputs, starting with the analysis approach, which defines how analysis will be performed for the portfolio, program, or project. Included in the analysis approach is a decision about how to conduct risk analysis, including details regarding the product risk management process, the risk categories, and how risks will be documented. The second input will be the business goals and objectives, which identify what the business is expecting a portfolio, program, or project to deliver. Product risks are evaluated and rated on whether and how much they may impact the business goals and objectives. Evaluating assumptions that were made in defining business goals and objectives might also lead to identifying additional risks. So one of the key activities we will be conducting in the identify and analyze product risks is assessing the impact of each risk, and the best to use in order to assess the impact of the risk is the business goals and objectives and how this risk will affect the business goals and objectives. The third input is the enterprise environmental factors, which are conditions that influence, constrain, or direct how business analysis is conducted. And it's not an output of other process, it's part of the enterprise or the organization itself. Analysis of the enterprise environmental factors can uncover product risk factors, such as when a legal or contractual restriction impacts how business analysis processes are conducted. Enterprise environmental factors are also include stakeholder risk appetite, which may influence the risk responses. While you are planning for the risk responses and the strategies you will be using with the identified risks, you need to think about the risk appetite and the risk tolerance accepted by the key stakeholders of the organization, and this information can be found in the enterprise environmental factors. The product scope is another input that can be defined as the features and functions that characterize a solution. Product risks are evaluated and rated on whether and how they may impact the product represented by the product scope statement. The last input is the requirements and other product information, which includes all other information about the solution and are the culmination of results from elicitation and analysis activities, and the product information can be evaluated in order to identify additional product risks. Now, what are the tools and techniques you will need to use while you are identifying and analyzing the product risks? Starting with one of the most popular scope models, the context diagram. As explained in the create and analyze models process, the context diagram shows all the direct system and the human interfaces to systems within the solution we are building as part of our project. And the context diagram clearly depicts the in-scope systems and any inputs or outputs, including the systems or actors providing or receiving them. And these models can be used in order to identify the product risks or the failure points by analyzing the interfaces shown in the context diagram. So you will use this model in order to look at the interfaces within the solution of the project or the product in order to analyze any failure points in these interfaces. The second tool will be the ecosystem map, which is again a scope model that shows all the relevant systems, the relationships between each system, and optionally any data objects passed between them. Now, the business analyst would use an ecosystem map for product risk analysis in the same way that a context diagram would be used. Ecosystem maps may be used to identify product risks or potential failure points through analyzing again the interfaces and objects passed between the systems. So looking at these two scope models can help us analyze the interfaces in order to define any potential risk or failure point. The third technique will be the elicitation techniques that are used to draw information from sources, different sources. Product risks are uncovered through elicitation. Thus, any of the elicitation techniques can be used to identify and analyze product risks. So, using any of the elicitation techniques we explained at the elicitation knowledge area section can be very useful in order to identify and analyze the product risks. We have also the estimation techniques that are usually used to provide a quantitative assessment of the likely amounts or outcomes. Various estimation techniques can be used to quantify the probability and impact of product risks. The estimation techniques will be useful as there are some uncertainty, or there is some uncertainty or risk in the estimations we did itself. As the range of the estimate is getting bigger, the more uncertainty or the more risk you will have with this estimate and the activity you are estimating for. We will have also the organizational charts, which can be defined as models that depict the reporting structure within an organization or within a part of an organization. These models can be used to identify risks related to stakeholder groups. For example, when there are stakeholder groups identified that may impact the business analysis and objectives. So the organizational charts are very useful in order to double check on all the stakeholders you identified, or if there are any missing stakeholder groups, and we can identify the risk related to different stakeholders groups in the organization by looking at the organizational chart. Process flows can be used also in this process, as they visually document the steps or tasks that people perform in their jobs or when they interact with a product. These models may be used to identify product risks or potential failure points by analyzing process steps, decision points, and handoffs between different actors in the process. So also this model was explained earlier. The process flow will show all the steps you will take while performing a job and all the titles or the functions responsible for these steps. The product backlog used in an agile environment is the list of all the product backlog items, usually represented in the form of user stories, requirements, or features that need to be delivered for a solution. Projects that employ adaptive approaches uses the product backlog as part of the requirements package. When needed, tasks called spikes, or specifically risk spikes, can be added to the product backlog in order to evaluate the risks. The item in the product backlog or the items are ranked in order of business value or importance to the customer and are continuously updated throughout a product's life cycle or a project's duration. So in agile projects, usually in order to deal with uncertainties and risks, we will conduct something called risk spikes. Risk spikes are taking a form of research, exercise research, or in order to identify additional risks or in order to analyze existing risks. So the risk spikes can be added to the product backlog in the form of user stories in order to account for different risk analyzing activities. The risk burn down charts also used in an agile environment. They are used to communicate progress over time. On adaptive projects, risk burn down charts can be used to show the status of risks across different iterations. Here is an example of the risk burn down chart showing the exposure of the risk at the start of the project and how it's going down as more iterations are progressing on the project. The sum of exposures probability multiplied by impact across all the product risks is mapped for each iteration. Ideally, the burn down chart should show a downward slope when connecting the data points to indicate that product risk exposures are decreasing as iterations progress. So the risk exposure for each risk can be identified by multiplying the probability by the impact, and the risk burn down chart will show you how the risk exposure is going down with each iteration. The risk register is an important tool of this process. It's a tool used to support analysis of product risks. Product risks are usually logged with corresponding details like the probability, the impact, the risk owner, the risk trigger in this risk register. Some of these details might include the risk ID, a unique number used to identify the risk description, which is a textual description of the risk, date logged when this risk was identified, risk owner, who is the person responsible of monitoring this risk and implementing the response when the risk occur, the status, which is the state of the risk, either it's opened or closed, for example, updates, progress information on the risk, impact rating, numerical rating representing the severity if the risk event were to occur, probability rating of this risk, which is a numerical rating representing the probability of the risk event occurring, the exposure, which is the impact multiplied by the probability for each risk. Triggers are signs that warn that the risk is about to occur or has already occurred, and the risk owner is responsible to monitor the triggers. The risk response, actions that can be taken to proactively address the risk. The risk response owner is a person responsible for executing the planned risk response and to assist the risk owner in managing the risk. And finally, the workaround of this risk, actions to be performed if the risk was to occur. So all these are details, different details that can be logged in the risk register, and of course it depends on the organizational process assets and the form or the template the organization is using. Number 10 is the root cause analysis, which is used to determine the basic underlying reason that causes a variance, defect, or a risk. So the root cause analysis can be used also in issues management, variance analysis, or risk management. Opportunity analysis is used to study the major facets of a potential opportunity to determine the possible changes in products offered to enable its achievement. Root cause and opportunity analysis can be used to develop risk response plans in order to proactively address negative product risks or take advantage of potential opportunities. The last technique will be the SWOT analysis, which is a popular technique used in business analysis and risk management, a technique for analyzing the strengths, the weaknesses of the organization, the project or option, and the opportunities and threats that exist externally. SWOT analysis can be used to identify potential product risks in the form of positive events, opportunities, or negative risks, which are threats. So these are the tools and techniques you can use in the identify and analyze product risks. And the key output of this process will be the product risk analysis. The product risk analysis includes the consolidated results from identifying and analyzing the product risks using all the previously mentioned tools and techniques. And usually the product risk analysis will consist of the identified product risks, list of potential responses for the identified risks, relative rating or priority list of the risks, and usually this rating will be in the form of probability and impact, symptoms and warning signs, which can be defined as the risk triggers, risks requiring responses in the near term, the urgency of the risks, risks for additional analysis and responses for complex or complicated risks, general trends and qualitative analysis results, and total risk exposure, which is the individual risk probability multiplied by the impact, and at the end the watch list. The watch list is a list where we are going to record all the low priority risks that does not require further analysis for future monitoring in the monitor risks process. So these 9 parts or 9 points are usually part of the product risk analysis, which is the key output of this process. Tailoring considerations for predictive and adaptive environments. Its name in the adaptive, it's not a formally named process. Risks are discussed and addressed in iteration 0. Iteration 0 is the first iteration on an agile project, which is usually not for the purpose of developing a feature or an increment of the product. It's only to align, to have an internal alignment between the team and to address the risks of the product. Or in the iteration planning and or the daily stand-ups and considered when determining the value of backlog items. Assumptions, constraints, dependencies, issues, and risks may be discussed at the same time. Teams focus on short iterations that will minimize the product risks, and the deliverable or the outcome will be risk spikes that are added to the product backlog when needed. The predictive considerations, it is known as the identify and analyze product risks, integrated with the portfolio program or project risk management processes that are performed throughout the portfolio program or project respectively. Assumptions, constraints, dependencies, issues, and risks may be discussed at the same time, and the deliverables in a predictive environment will be a robust risk register. Sometimes assumptions, constraints, and dependencies and issues and risks are combined into a single register. The collaboration in this process between the portfolio program and project managers who will work together on the identification, analysis, and management of product risks, because collectively they are a subset of the portfolio program or project risks. Risk response plans that modify or add requirements or project activities may have the portfolio program or project implications. Therefore, collaboration on risk activities is essential. So usually the business analyst will be focused with the product risks, and the portfolio program or project manager will be focused with the project risks. But of course, the product risks will be a subset of the project risks. So there will be a collaboration between the product managers or product team members, the business analysts, and the portfolio program or project managers. This is all for the identify and analyze product risks. Thank you so much. I will see you at the next lecture.